It is time to talk about one of my favorite video games of all time, Super Mario Galaxy. Super Mario Galaxy is an amazing game filled to the brim with great content. Its level designs are so unique and it's unlike anything that has ever been seen in the Mario series. Its power-ups are so quirky and bizarre, and its bosses are some of the most interesting ones in the Mario series. So that's why I want to talk about my top 10 favorite Super Mario Galaxy bosses. Now, before we get into this video, let me just say that this is my opinion. So if you see a boss on here you don't like, then let me know in the comments below, but don't hate on me because I like that boss. Anyway, now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's talk about my top 10 favorite Super Mario Galaxy bosses. Super Mario Galaxy is filled to the brim with amazing bosses that are all pretty unique in their own ways. Out of all the bosses that I've faced in Super Mario Galaxy, I would have to say that I enjoyed a majority of them. They stand out quite a bit compared to other Mario games, and Piranha is no exception to this. Although Piranha isn't my favorite boss in Super Mario Galaxy, it is a very creative one. It is one of the game's more simplistic bosses, but this simplicity isn't a bad thing, especially when it comes to Mario games. The way that you beat Piranha is kinda tedious, but the way that you beat it is pretty interesting when compared to other bosses. For starters, Piranha is the only Super Mario Galaxy boss that's fought in a 2D plane, which might not sound special, but it is because having a 2D section in a 3D game isn't just a nice change of pace, but it also makes said section stand out in your mind more than it does for other levels, and this can definitely be said about Piranha's fight. Second, Piranha is quite bizarre in both its design and the way that you have to beat it. While most bosses in Super Mario Galaxy have Mario jump or spin to damage it, Piranha has Mario use the newly introduced power-up, the Sling Pods, to have Mario pop all three in Piranha's weak spots, which can be revealed by hitting Piranha's butt. Also, this boss is intuitive in the sense that this boss's design is made in such a way that its weak spots are super obvious, and there are toads placed in the sling pod so the player knows that they can be used to give yourself enough height to damage one of Piranha's weak spots. Now, this isn't a great example of an intuitive boss fight, but it is designed in a way that the player can easily understand how to beat Piranha and have fun while doing so. Finally, Piranha is a pretty good theme to accompany its fight. But again, most of Super Mario Galaxy's bosses have amazing themes, but this theme in particular really matches Piranha and the galaxy overall. So even though Piranha might not be my favorite boss in Super Mario Galaxy, it does a lot of things really well that makes it make it on my list. Out of all the bosses that I can talk about, this boss is by far one of the coolest when it comes to the use of its galaxy's main gimmick, which will be a common theme throughout this video. However, what makes this boss stand out compared to the rest of them is the fact that Bugaboo is mostly fought in the air. Bugaboo is an interesting boss. Unlike a majority of the bosses in Super Mario Galaxy, Bugaboo's fight is mostly aerial, which is pretty cool to see in a Mario game. However, what I like about this boss in particular is that he utilizes the B power-up as well as having a fast-paced fight with a lot going on. Since Bugaboo's weak spot is on its back and it'll start flying once you've hit it once, you'll have to get enough height to hit its back somehow, and that's where the B power-up comes into play. This is a great way to implement this power-up, especially since this is the last challenge of the Honey Hive Galaxy, and by this point you will have had a great deal of experience using this power-up. Also, what I like about this fight, especially when compared to the rematch in Super Mario Galaxy 2, is how fast-paced this fight is. Bugaboo moves quickly and has a powerful attack that has a lot of range. Since the B power-up is a pretty slow power-up, you'll have some trouble trying to fly towards it and land on top of it. Fortunately, there are a few different options for attacking it. The first option is to wait on these honey petals for it to get near you, which is the safest way to fight Bugaboo, but also it's the slowest way of fighting it. The second option, however, is much faster and more of a challenge. You can use these flowers to launch yourself high enough to land on top of it. What makes this cool is that you have several different methods of beating it, but also it has replayability. If you want to try to beat it in every way possible, then you can go back and try to use the flowers to launch yourself on it if you waited for the honey petals the first time you fought it. This is why Bugaboo is on my list and why it's a good boss in general. boss had to be somewhere on my list because you can't have a list about the best bosses in Super Mario Galaxy without this boss because of how iconic it is. This boss is probably the most iconic boss in the game because it's the very first one you face, and it's because it's one of the more enjoyable ones in the series. I'm referring to Dino Piranha, of course, if that wasn't obvious already. Even though this boss is by far one of the easiest bosses in Super Mario Galaxy, it doesn't change the fact that I really like it. For starters, Dino Piranha might be one of the most intuitive bosses in Super Mario Galaxy when it comes to its design and how you have to kill it. It's designed in such a way that its weak spot isn't super obvious while also being pretty easy to pick up on. Let's compare Dino Piranha's weak spot to Pterantox's. Pterantox's weak spots are flashy green and red bubbles that Mario has to hit by launching himself into them, while Dino Piranha's weak spot is its egg and head. And there's only one thing that you can hit during Dino Piranha's first phase because it's the only thing exposed, being its massive tail. The way that you have to damage it doesn't change throughout the entire fight, but the difficulty of the fight still increases. It tests the player on how they can adapt to change, how the boss's fight works, and tests the player's observational skills. This is a really cool boss when it comes to how intuitive it is, but it's not the only reason why I like this boss. I also like the literal design of Dino Piranha as well as the speedrunning aspect of this fight. Whenever I fight Dino Piranha, I will always try to beat it as fast as I can, and because of its design, it is possible to beat in under 30 seconds, maybe even under 20 seconds. I feel like it was designed like this on purpose because it adds replayability to the level, and so if you want to replay through the game, you can quickly beat Dino Piranha so you can move on and play through the rest of the game, or you can test your skills by trying to see how fast you can beat it. Dino Piranha is a really great boss when it comes to how it's designed, and it's certainly a fantastic first boss. Before I reveal what my number 7 choice is, I need to talk about a game that reminds me a lot of this boss and another boss higher on my list, Shadow of the Colossus. Now, if you've never heard of this game before, then do yourself a favor and look into this game because it is truly a masterpiece. For those who don't know what Shadow of the Colossus is, it's a game that consists of 16 colossi that you must take down. This is easier said than done because these colossi are, well, massive. You have to literally climb on their bodies in order to kill them because they're so big. Well, for the most part anyway. The way that you have to take down these bosses is unlike any boss that I've ever seen. So when I had the pleasure of fighting Mecha Bowser, I was thrilled to get to see Mario's interpretation of this style of boss. Now what makes this boss so cool is that it's very similar to the Colossi from Shadow of the Colossus, while at the same time having a design and style that most Mario bosses have. It has weak spots on his body that you have to destroy or break like most of the Colossi in Shadow of the Colossus, but instead of having to stab a weak spot like in Shadow of the Colossus, you have to unscrew all of Mecha Bowser's screws to make the robot fall apart. Now, I do really like this boss's design and how it feels like a Shadow of the Colossus boss, but there is one issue that prevents this boss from being any higher on my list. It never attacks you. Mecha Bowser seems to ignore you entirely. The only thing on it that does damage are its seemingly random enemies that just so happen to be on or near Mecha Bowser. This makes this boss feel a little bland, especially since there is no urgency to take it down. I mean, it doesn't even look intimidating like the Colossi do, or even most Mario bosses do. So, I can't put this overly simplistic boss any higher on my list, even if it does have a really cool concept. Now, if you're interested in the Shadow of the Colossus aspect of this list, then I have a pretty thorough video about my top 10 favorite Shadow of the Colossus colossi. If you want to check that video out, I'll link it in the description below. Anyway, let's move on to the next boss. Out of all the bosses in Super Mario Galaxy, this boss is by far the most sinister one. None of the other bosses besides Bowser, Bowser Jr., and technically Mecha Bowser seem to be hurting anyone. They mostly seem to be annoying the citizens by taking over a galaxy. This boss, however, is trying to kill a bunny to eat it for dinner, so we actually have a reason to kill this boss. We want to defend this harmless bunny from the evil Major Burrows. Now, I was over-exaggerating just a bit for the intro segment. Even though I was over-exaggerating just a bit, it doesn't change the fact that we actually have a reason to kill this boss other than the fact that we need a power star. But that's not why I like Major Burrows' fight. I like his fight because of how bizarre it is. It reminds me a lot of the werewolf from Courage the Cowardly Dog in the way that it fights. It will make tunnels underground and then attack once it's gotten close enough to you. And the only way to weaken him is to ground pound near him and launch him out of his tunnel and then spin attack him, which is not only a pretty unique mechanic, but it also adds more personality to this boss, which isn't common in a lot of Mario bosses. Also, I love Major Burrows' theme. It is definitely one of my favorite boss themes in Super Mario Galaxy because the song perfectly matches the tone and pace of the fight. It is frantic and all over the place, much like how Major Burrows moves frantically the more you hit him. And it's pretty quirky for a boss theme, much like how Major Burrows is a quirky boss. Other than the fact that I like how quirky and bizarre Major Burrows is, there isn't much more I can say about this boss. So, let's move on. For whatever reason, there seems to always be at least one boss that's just like another boss, but there's one new element to the fight that completely changes the way that you fight it. In the case of my number 5 choice, it's just like the original version of the boss except it's covered in fire. I'm of course referring to Fiery Dino Piranha. Now, what makes Fiery Dino Piranha so cool, or should I say so hot? Yeah, I immediately regretted making that pun as soon as I said it. Anyway, what makes this boss so interesting is, well, the fact that it's covered in fire. This one new element not only makes this boss a bit more challenging, but it also makes you have to approach it in a completely different way than you did with Dino Piranha. Where you could just rapidly attack Dino Piranha to kill it quickly, you have to take your time to attack Fiery Dino Piranha. You have to wait until it isn't covered in fire to attack it, you have to avoid touching the fire because it will make Mario frantically run around, which can result in you taking more damage, and you have to avoid some of its new fiery attacks, like its tail leaving a trail of fire, fireballs that it will spit out, and its fiery charge, which is a lot more threatening than Dino Piranha's considering that it's covered in fire. However, my favorite thing about Fiery Dino Piranha is its color alterations and design change. Fiery Dino Piranha reminds me a lot of subspecies from Monster Hunter, which is an alternate version of a specific monster that adds one or more different things to its fight. Although this might seem lazy to some, I think it's refreshing to use an old boss in a somewhat or completely new way, as long as it doesn't feel too much like the original version, and that's exactly how most subspecies in Monster Hunter are, and how Fiery Dino Piranha is. Of course, it isn't completely different from Dino Piranha. I mean, it wouldn't be a Dino Piranha if it was. It still has to be killed in the same way, it still has the same amount of phases, and it still has a similar build to Dino Piranha, besides some minor details. So because Nintendo didn't make Fiery Dino Piranha a lazy duplicate of Dino Piranha, and because I prefer this version over the original in both difficulty and design, I can safely say that Fiery Dino Piranha is one of my favorite bosses in Super Mario Galaxy. Remember how I said Mecha Bowser is an interesting boss because of how similar its design is to a Colossus from Shadow of the Colossus? Well, there's actually another boss in Super Mario Galaxy that's like the Colossi, but unlike Mecha Bowser, Mega Legs is actually an intimidating boss that feels much more like a Colossus than Mecha Bowser does. Now, this boss isn't my favorite when it comes to its fight because it's actually one of the easiest bosses in Super Mario Galaxy. I like this boss for the aesthetic and design. For starters, this is another intuitive boss. Before you fight Mega Legs, there is a tiny planet where you have to use bullet bills to hit a glass case that has a launch star in it. On this planet, you learn that the bullet bills can be used to break glass, which just so happens to be Mega Legs' weakness. So I already really like how intuitive this boss is. However, my favorite thing about this boss is of course its Shadow of the Colossus vibes. Like Mecha Bowser, you have to climb it to get to its weakness. But unlike Mecha Bowser, it actually has defense mechanisms. For example, the moment you walk on it, the alarm goes off and the arrows on its legs go from being green to red. This adds a level of intensity that Mecha Bowser doesn't have. And as you climb Mega Legs, it starts launching bullet bills at you that you must dodge, which actually makes sense for this fight when compared to the random enemies that Mecha Bowser has. And finally, you must break open a glass container on top of its head to get the Grand Star. And you must have a full understanding of how to guide the bullet bills. This boss is definitely a classic boss because of how unique it is for a Mario boss. However, as I mentioned earlier, this boss's fight is really easy once you've fought it once. This boss has little to no replayability, which is really unfortunate. Of course, it isn't easy to add replayability for a boss with this kind of fight, especially when it's as simplistic as Mega Legs is. Normally, I would say simplicity isn't bad, but in the case of trying to replicate or do something similar to a Colossus fight, you have to add some complexity to add replayability. So because of this, I can't have Mega Legs any higher on my list, despite how cool this boss is. If you've seen any of my other videos about Super Mario Galaxy, you would know that I like this boss quite a bit. In fact, this boss is one of my most discussed ones on my channel, so the fact that I found another way to talk about how amazing this fight is doesn't surprise me at all. I wouldn't be surprised if I talk about King Caliente again in the future. King Caliente is one of the most ingenious bosses from Super Mario Galaxy. Not because of its complexity or even its design, but because of how intuitive this boss is compared to other bosses in the Mario series. Now, I have talked about in great detail how intuitive this boss is in 2 different videos now, so I won't go over it in too much detail. Rather, I'll go over some other aspects about King Caliente that I like. However, before I get into that, I still need to discuss how amazing this boss is when it comes to its intuitiveness. Before you even fight King Caliente, the player already knows its weakness. How is this possible? Well, there are some enemies on the ship right before the boss that act as a tutorial for how to take down King Caliente. These enemies will only shoot green coconuts at Mario, and if Mario gets hit by these coconuts, he won't take any damage, and they don't shoot fireballs, so there's no harm in experimenting by getting hit by these green coconuts. Even before this, there's another planet that has these green coconuts that you have to use to hit a Pokey that would be impossible to kill otherwise. So as you can see, this boss is amazing when it comes to how intuitive it is. Honestly, this is probably one of the best designed levels in Super Mario Galaxy. That aside, King Caliente is still a good boss, even if there wasn't this intuitiveness with its fight. The fight is very creative when compared to every single boss in both Super Mario Galaxy 1 and 2. I especially love the rematch fight with him later in the game, because that fight is actually more of a challenge because by this point, you should know exactly how all the mechanisms of King Caliente's fight work. And finally, I love how bizarre his design is. I think it is safe to say that a majority of the bosses in Super Mario Galaxy all have designs that stand out, but for me personally, King Caliente has the best design out of every boss in Super Mario Galaxy. It's simplistic but also weird in comparison to everything else in the game. And something else I haven't really mentioned with any of the other bosses is the actual arena where you fight the bosses. Now, what I like about King Caliente's fight is I like his planet is literally a volcano. You are fighting a gigantic squid on a volcano. I don't think it gets any cooler than that. So yeah, I think it's one of the best bosses in Super Mario Galaxy, and I think it's one of the best bosses in the Mario series. Now, there are a lot of diverse bosses in Super Mario Galaxy that are mostly pretty creative, but this boss is in a completely different league when it comes to how well this boss is designed in both its design and how intuitive it is. Poltergeist is not just one of my favorite bosses in Super Mario Galaxy, it is one of my favorite Mario bosses of all time. As you can see, there's been a recurring theme with all my favorite bosses from Super Mario Galaxy, being that they're all intuitive. And Poltergeist is definitely one of the most intuitive bosses in Super Mario Galaxy. Again, like King Caliente and Mega Legs, the player already knows how to defeat Poltergeist before the fight even begins, because there's a segment at the start of the level involving these explosive boos, which just so happens to be Poltergeist's weakness. Now, this is of course something I really like in a good boss, but that's not even why I like this boss. I like that this boss is actually difficult and has one of the coolest themes in all of Super Mario Galaxy. If you've played Super Mario Galaxy before, which I hope you have if you're watching this video, then you probably experienced Poltergeist's Daredevil comment. If you haven't, then let me talk about this mission. In this mission, you have to beat Poltergeist without taking any damage, which is probably one of the hardest missions in Super Mario Galaxy. Now, I'm not trying to brag or anything, but I'm actually pretty good at fighting Poltergeist and have no issues doing this mission because I've done it so many times. What makes Poltergeist so difficult is the range of attacks it has, the literal range in its attacks, and there isn't a whole lot of room to fight it. As you can see from the gameplay, this boss is hectic, but it's fun as hell and feels like a real challenge when compared to everything else leading up to this fight. And finally, its theme fits its fight perfectly. It's ominous and slow at first, and then picks up and gets faster and more intense as the fight gets more intense and difficult. Since Poltergeist is a ghost, this ominous theme works wonderfully for this fight. I mean, the whole galaxy is equivalent to a ghost house, so it's only fitting to have a spooky theme for a spooky boss. Out of all the bosses on this list, I think this one is the most polished one when it comes to its fight, design, and theme. I wish there were more bosses from this game that were like Poltergeist. Out of all the bosses on this list, this one is by far the weirdest one. Not because the boss itself is weird, but because it's the forgotten boss of Super Mario Galaxy. No one ever talks about how great this boss is, and it's such a shame because King Fin is by far the best boss in Super Mario Galaxy. Say what you want to, this boss in my opinion is the best boss in Super Mario Galaxy. I would even go as far as saying it is objectively the best boss in the game. Let me explain why. For starters, King Fin has an amazing design. It is a massive shark made out of just bones. Now, if this isn't badass, then I don't know what is. Also, this boss is difficult. Like 99% of the bosses in Super Mario Galaxy, you fight bosses on land and have access to all your moveset. But this isn't the case with King Fin. Because the fight takes place entirely underwater, you are the one that's at an extreme disadvantage. The first thing that makes this fight hard is the fact that your moveset is limited. You can't walk, run, or jump, which is pretty much everything that is important for a Mario game. Secondly, since this boss is always underwater, you have to always check your air meter. Moving in the water isn't easy either. You could swim slowly and save your air, but if you want to collect a green or red turtle shell and try to quickly dodge attacks, you have to spin, which will take a big chunk of your air. So not only do you have a very limited moveset, but you also constantly have to monitor your air meter. Now all this makes this boss more difficult than any other boss in Super Mario Galaxy. But that isn't even the end of what makes this boss hard. Unlike every boss in this game, there isn't a specific weak spot that you have to hit. You can hit it anywhere on its body to damage it, but you can't directly damage it yourself. you have to use the shells that are scattered around the area to damage it. And if you want to even be guaranteed to hit Kingfin, then you'll have to use the red shells since those home on the Kingfin. But there's only one red shell in the area and you have to find where it is, which can be a huge pain in the ass, especially when Kingfin is charging towards you. And the final thing that really makes me like this boss is its second phase. While the first phase is slow and pretty easy for the most part since it's introducing all these new mechanics to you, the second phase takes things to another level. Kingfin now has bonefish missiles that will home onto you once you get within a certain range of Kingfin, which makes aiming the shells way harder to do since you can't move as fast in the water, and dodging these missiles can be extremely hard to do. I love this boss so much. I have never seen a Mario boss do anything as ambitious as what Kingfin does. It actually is so refreshing to see a boss that is this complex in a Mario game. I hope that we get another boss like this in the future because everything about this boss is breathtaking. I'm sorry. I had to end on a pun. I just had to. So, do you agree or disagree with my list? Let me know in the comments below whether you do or not. And if you like this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up because that would help me a lot. Also, if you want to see more content like this, then you should heavily consider subscribing to Redleopardvideos. And I guess make sure to ring that bell or click that bell or whatever it is YouTubers say nowadays. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching this video. My name is Ryan Kelly and I hope to see you in the next one. Peace.